So I have the pleasure now to give you some brief experience on what it means working with KfW from the experience of German consulting companies. And but first of all, I would like to use the opportunity to give a very brief presentation of our association. Yeah, so VBI, Verband Beratende Ingenieure, is the German Association of Consulting Engineers. And just some facts and figures. We have a few more years than EFCA, which is no surprise. We were founded already in the beginning of the last century, so more than 100 years. And our association is representing about 2,000 associated member companies with more than 40,000 employees. And the main activities are, of course, development of competence, know-how, and know-how transfer to our members, representation of our interests also on the political level, and of course, networking, among others. We are a member of EFCA and FIDIC, and the association lives from the very active participation of its members. So we are organized with having several committees, mainly for technical issues like transport committee or water resource management. But there's one committee which is dealing also with international business, and this is the one I'm representing here. We have 40 member companies, and what all of them have in common is that an important part, or even the main part of their business, is developed in international activities. And so it's no surprise that many of them also have a strong experience in international developing cooperation. And within our International Business Committee, we have several task forces cooperating with other institutions like KfW and GIZ, which of course are very important, especially for German consulting companies working in the developing sector. So we have frequent meetings and exchange with GIZ and KfW, always aiming at improving the quality of our cooperation. And of course, there are also other task forces dealing with EFCA and others. So coming to the experience, I tried to focus on very few specific issues which in some cases differ from other international financing institutions. So what they have in common and what is very important for KfW is transparency, and this also helps every interested company in working with KfW, because you can follow up the preparation of KfW finance projects, because all the steps are published. I put here GTAI, but there are other media also where this information, where you can find this information. And not only this, you also find at the end of the pre-qualification processes, you find the names of the shortlisted consultants, and you also finally find the name of the company who has been awarded with a contract. So this means it's an important source of information for any interested company with regard to new projects, but also with regard to potential partners, because it helps you to understand the market. A very specific issue regarding KfW procurement is the involvement of tender agents. So in almost all KfW tenders, you will find tender agents during the whole procurement phase, starting with the preparation of the terms of reference, but also evaluating together with the respective committees of the beneficiaries, evaluating the pre-qualification documents and the proposals. And even more, in many cases, tender agents also participate in the contract negotiation. Usually, tendering is organized in a two-stage process with KfW. So we start with the pre-qualification. Of course, all this, I guess, will be explained by Ms. Prasse when she has the chance to give us a deeper insight in all these steps. But just to tell you from our experience, although all these documents are standardized and you find all these documents on the website of KfW, don't underestimate the time you have to invest for the preparation of pre-qualification. So you have to check very carefully the specific requirements, and to be successful, you should invest some time. If you are successful, then you will be shortlisted together with a total of up to 5 companies. So the shortlists are rather short compared to some other financing institutions. The technical proposals, as always, are based mainly on detailed terms of reference, and besides the CVs, a lot of importance is given to, or has to be given to the chapters, comments on the terms of reference and methodology. So again, consider this as a project when you prepare proposals for KfW, especially for KfW. Again, it's quite labor intensive. The financial proposal, there's not that much to say. It's clearly structured, similar to other donors. Important to know, the weight for the technical and financial proposals 80-20, so also in line with most of the other procurements. But one important issue which you should take care of is the question of local taxes. So the time when international companies and their foreign experts were exempted from local taxes in KfW finance projects is almost over, and there are only some exceptions with new procurements where we still find this exemption from local taxes. So check very carefully the requirements in the data sheet in your request for proposal, because there are very many different ways how to define your requirements regarding local taxes and how to present it in the financial proposal, if these taxes have to be included in the rates, shown separately. Anyhow, this is extremely important because otherwise there's a high risk that you lose the proposal because you have not considered this correctly, or that you win the proposal but you lose a lot of money in the implementation of the project because you have underestimated this important issue. So after the procurement, and if you have been successful, then the next step will be the standard contract. So let's come to the implementation of projects with KfW. The standard contract is largely harmonized with contracts of other international financing institutes. It's similar to the World Bank contract and clearly structured, so no problem about this. And it's usually signed by the consulting company and the beneficiary. So normally it's the KfW is not a contractual party. Nevertheless, you will find KfW deeply involved in the implementation of the project. Normally, you will find good cooperation, but also with high expectations from KfW's side, according to our experience, particularly with regard to the technical quality of your services, and even more with regard to environmental, social, health, and safety issues. Most likely you will experience, and compared to some other donors, even more, a strong commitment, which also means a strong involvement of KfW teams. And when we talk about teams, we talk about number of specialists, namely project manager, procurement expert, technical advisors, Eshs experts, and maybe others. And you can expect that all of them will closely follow up your services and comment your deliverables. And all this leads to high importance for quality control, and this is expected that you give a lot of head office support and backstopping to your project teams. And last but not least, payments, not that much to say about, so it's secure, the funds are quite secure. You get mainly paid by direct disbursement by KfW upon disbursement request from your employer. Payments are partially slow, So the payment periods are already quite long and of course not always respected, but I think all of us who work in this business are quite used to this. And with this information, I'm coming to an end. I hope it serves as an impulse for the further discussion we will have at the end of our today's webinar. And that's it already. So I thank you for your attention, and I hope that Ms. Prasse is there and can continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Meyerhoff. That was very insightful. Thank you for sharing that with us. Virginie, can you update us on the status of Mrs. Prasse connection?
I tried to contact her, but with no luck. And I contacted VBI just now 5 minutes ago, and I'm waiting for feedback.
Okay. So I would suggest that we move on to the next speakers, and we wait for Ms. Prasse to join the webinar. We have the pleasure, I think, to have Emeline Audin and Xavier Mesnard from AFD's procurement unit.
Yes, we are there.
Yes. Could you light the camera so that we can see you?
Sorry.
Yes, hello. Great. Thank you for joining the webinar. We are keen to listen to you. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So my colleague will start, but we are very happy to be with you today. So we will have a short presentation. So Xavier, you can start.
Yes. Can you see the screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. So we are going to present rapidly the main figure.
Do you hear?
Yeah, we can hear.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry for if there was some lag. So yeah, I was saying that I'm going to start with some figures of the consulting services contracts that AFD finances in foreign countries. I'm being specific about the foreign countries because as for KfW, of course, AFD has some contracts that are directly contracted by AFD, but here we're focusing on the contracts we finance and which are signed by our beneficiaries. So this is a first slide on to give you an overview of the total amounts of consulting services contracts financed by AFD. So you can see that this is for the past 4 years, so 2017, 18, 19, 20, with a total of 674,000 kilo euros. So it's actually 674 million euros total over these 4 years. And the breakdown between the different continents basically is the major share in Africa, smaller share in Asia and Middle East, and then a much smaller amount in South America and what we call the 3 oceans, meaning basically a lot of smaller countries in different islands where we also work. And the view of this is this chart where you can see the actual number of contracts. That's the yellow line, so ranging between 150 and 250 contracts per year. These are actually only the international procurement competitions that are financed by AFD. We're not counting the local tenders in here. And you have the aggregate amounts per year. Of course, there was a significant drop in 2020, I guess partially for obvious reasons. We're hoping this will resume back to more usual figures in 2021. Also, interestingly, we can present the breakdown of these contracts by sectors, because I believe that among the people here in the webinar, you probably represent engineering firms from many different areas. So again, this is in terms of amount. You see the breakdown between well, agriculture, energy, water, sanitation, infrastructure, and other smaller areas where AFD is financing contracts. So water and sanitation and infrastructure and urban development, with energy just behind, and agriculture also following closely, are the main areas where consulting services contracts are financed. So this is to give you a brief overview of where AFD is financing consulting services contracts. Maybe a second part, which will be of interest to you all, is where European firms are involved in all of this. So here is another chart that gives you an idea of where European firms well, how they fare in this game. So basically, you can see that around 80% of all these, well, it's not 80% of contract, it's 80% in terms of amount of consulting services contract are awarded to European firms, EU firms. And then, of course, a smaller share goes to other foreign or international firms, engineering firms, and also around 10% go to local firms. Generally, the quality of European consulting firms is largely recognized in all the countries where we work. And this last slide of introduction with all these figures is also giving the market shares by sector. So for European firms, again, this is still aggregated for 2017-2020. And you can see that in the health, water and sanitation and agriculture sectors, and actually infrastructure is also just behind with 81%. These are sectors where European firms are getting quite a large share of all the consulting services contracts that are awarded on AFD financing. So this was to give you an overview. It's really just a couple of figures, but I think it shows you where we stand, what we finance, and the amounts at stake. And I will let Emmeline take the floor for the next couple of slides on actual procurement principles.
Thank you. So this third part will be a brief insight on the general principle governing procurement processes on AFD finance contracts. So it will be brief, but we'll do the best. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So we wanted just to present you the standard scenario and different actors in procurement processes. First of all, us as a financing institution, we sign a financing agreement with what we call the beneficiary or the contracting authority. And this is this contracting authority beneficiary which is responsible for the procurement processes. So they are the ones to launch the request for expression of interest, for instance, to evaluate the proposals, and to award the contract, and as well to supervise the contract with a contractor or a consulting firm in case of consulting services. You can go to next slide. The procurement processes must follow general principles, which are what you may know, the international good practices, so equity, openness, and transparency. As we are accountable for the use of public funds, we are vigilant that our loans and grants are used efficiently and that no prohibited practices occur during procurement processes. So we try to be as vigilant as possible. And I will describe some procurement guidelines regarding these general principles. And the last important characteristic is that our aid and grants and loans are untied, meaning that all countries all over the world can apply to procurement processes financed by AFD and can be awarded a contract, except in cases of international embargoes or in cases of prohibited sectors. But otherwise, it's open to all the nationalities. You can move to next slide. Thank you. To go into more detail than this very general principle, we have also a document which is called the Procurement Guidelines, which is a 30-page document, public. It's available on our website if you want to have a look at it, and it describes the main principle and selection method that has to be followed by the contracting authorities. It also describes this responsibility from the contracting authority in the procurement processes, and that the AFDs, these guidelines that the beneficiary has to comply both with its own laws and regulation and AFD's guidelines. So they have to follow both rules, and as long as they do not contradict, and in case of their contradiction between the local applicable laws and regulation, we have a discussion with the contracting authority to find a solution which preserves the international good practices. Our guidelines also states what are the eligibility criteria for AFD finance contracts. So we have some exclusion cases. If a consulting firm, for instance, is one of these exclusion cases, it cannot be awarded a contract as long as it is financed by AFD. I'm not going into details of the different exclusion crises, but for instance, we have some, if there has been sanction because of fraud or corruption during procurement processes, it's one of the cases where there is an exclusion. And of course, the rule is a competitive process, and direct contracting is only the exception. It can be accepted in some circumstances, but it has to be very well justified, and we'll have to be informed and to give what we call a no objection on this direct contracting. You can move to next slide. To go into more details, but Mr. Rapp has already given some information, and we have the same process as KfW for consulting services. For contracts amounting about above 200,000 euros, we request the contracting authority to first launch a request for expression of interest. It's what Mr. Ralph called the pre-qualification. It's kind of pre-selection. So it's a first step. It has to be published on media which are wide to be for the consulting services firms to be informed. It will permit the contracting authority to prepare to draw up a shortlist of maximum of 6 consulting firms, which will be allowed to provide a proposal at the next stage. So only the 6 shortlisted consulting firms can be allowed for the next stages of the procurement process. And another characteristic of the consulting services procurement processes is that the selection method will be to award the contract at the highest scored consultant. So meaning that there is a scoring of the quality of the technical proposal as well as scoring of the financial proposal. But the score for the technical proposal needs to outweigh the financial score. So in most of the cases, it's between 70 to 80% for the technical score and 20 to 30% for the financial score. You can go to the next. So I will not go into detail for goods and works contracts because it's not the topic for today. Just to know that it will be open tender with or without a pre-qualification stage, and the evaluation and the selection method will be based on the lowest evaluated compliance bid, and the bidder has to be qualified as well. Here is just to explain the controls that AFD make on procurement processes. So as I mentioned, the contracting authority is responsible for the procurement process, so he has to prepare all the documents, the evaluation reports, and so on. But it also has to provide them to AFD, for AFD to check that the documents prepared are in line with our guidelines and the best practices, and that we agree with the content of the documents before going to the next stage. So at each stage of the procurement process, the contracting authority has to request AFD, it's no objection, so it's the null, no objection letters, to go to the next stage of the procurement process. So as you may see, for consulting firms, we have up to 6 no objection letters to issue at each stage. You can go to next slide. So it's the same process for works and goods contracts. And the presentation is very brief. If you want to have more information, you can go on our website, where you will find that we have tutorials on our guidelines. So 8 very short tutorials you may follow to have more explanation on these guidelines and the characteristic. You can also find all our standard bidding documents that are available on our website. They are based on the multilateral development banks, so we are quite close to the documents from World Bank, for instance. And we also have a specific website which is called afd.dgmarket.com, where we request the contracting authority to publish the international procurement competition. So for consulting services, it's where they will publish the request for expression of interest for all the contracts above 200,000 euros. So you may create alerts on this website to be informed of new tenders published on the website by the contracting authority financed by AFD. You can go to next slide. And if you want to go even further on the procurement process with AFD, we have developed a full online training on procurement. So it was first developed for contracting authority to help them to carry out procurement process in accordance with AFD's guidelines and main rules, and to be more at ease with our standard bidding documents. But it's also open to everybody who wants to have more information, and you just need to register on the website, and it's free. So if you are interested to have more details, you can go on this e-learning as well. Okay, it's fine for my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Emmeline. So in the last part for this AFD presentation, I'm going to outline the 3 main areas where we've made some changes in the past years, and which were well, those changes stemmed from a number of discussions on the within AFD with other donors and also with engineering firms. We have regular meetings with the Syntex, or the French Federation of Consulting Firms, to better understand the needs, to better understand any evolutions on the ways business is conducted, and to try to answer any queries or improvements that we could make to our documents. So the three areas that I'm going to develop rapidly. Actually, I'm not sure how long I still have for under this presentation. If Ines or Virginie, you want to confirm how much time left I have. But the three areas are the ones that were mentioned earlier in the introductions, which were the topic of ESHS issues. We have the topic of security on the contracts, and as well the issue of taxes. So starting with the environmental, social, health, and safety clauses, this is something that AFD has sort of pioneered in, well, it was already a few years ago. I think it started in 2014 or 15. The first stages we have on these ESHS clauses, we developed basically a number of ESHS specifications for works. So of course, this is first intended to be implemented in works contracts, which is not directly the issue of the consulting firms you represent, but of course it has a lot of impact for consulting firms, since it means that all the feasibility studies and the detailed design, etc., need also to tackle the issues of environmental health, social health and safety management on the work side, how this is going to be specified, what is at stake, what are the main risks, and what needs to be asked for in the selection of the contractor. Basically, the idea behind this for AFD as a donor is, well, first to avoid, of course, having negative impact on the environment. That's a given. On people as well. It will also, in the end, limit delays and overcosts. That is one of the aims. The idea is, in procurement terms, to make sure that the works contractors that are going to be awarded contracts, they do have the capacity to manage a work site on ESHS terms, that they are responsible contractors. And last but not least, the idea was also to ensure a level playing field, knowing that a number of contractors already included a lot of ESHS management aspects in their bids, while other contractors may not be that wary of these issues. And so by making sure that this is the specifications are the same for all bidders, it put all the firms on a level playing field. What AFD does is that it is now clear that these ESHS measures are financed within the contract, the works contracts. And also there are a number of measures regarding the implementation of these clauses. And this is also where engineering firms come into play, because in terms of work supervision, there is part of the job, and it's now on a routine basis in the TORs for supervision of works, the supervision of the implementation of these ESHS specifications is also part of the job, and it can lead to suspension of payments or even suspension of works in the case of very serious non-conformities from these ESHS specifications. So this was quite a breakthrough. I think I can use this word in terms of procurement with financed by IFIs. Of course, now it's become more common through the different projects and through other donors. So you may probably have seen this already. If you want to know more, you can have a look at our standard bidding documents for works. They do include the ESHS specifications, which are about 40 pages long, and they cover all the main, well, all the aspects of worksite management, including not letting a can spill oil on the floor like this, or not letting workers on this kind of scaffolding without any protective equipment, for instance. So yes, you can see on the standard bidding documents for works how it works more specifically, and it will normally be asked of the consultants preparing the design, etc., to work on these aspects as well. So this was ESHS in 3 minutes, and now The second aspect I'd like to touch upon is the issue of security. At AFD, we are working on a number of countries with security issues. And by security, of course, we refer mostly to terrorism. That's the main point. Of course, it could be civil unrest or a number of other issues, but it's mostly terrorism, which is a problem in the areas where AFD is financing projects. You'll see on the bottom right corner of this slide a map of the world, which is drawn by the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and which basically labels well, countries and actually areas within countries with different colors based on the risk, and I'll let you guess which color is the riskiest. So starting in 2019, our procurement guidelines made it mandatory for international procurement competitions that both the bidding documents in the case of works, but also the request for proposals in the case of consulting services, including requests for expression of interest, include, let's say, requirements in terms of security. It means that what is at stake is that, well, of course, AFD wants to ensure that the risk is as limited as possible in terms of lives and stakes on the projects. So we want to ensure that the contracts are awarded to firms which take these matters seriously and which have experience working in these areas, basically. So, for instance, we'll ask that firms working in having to work in a red area in the Sahel region, for instance, already has some experience doing this kind of things, that they have repatriation insurance contract in case of any issue, etc., etc. For works, we also have a number of requirements. These are also measures that are financed in the contract. So anything that the firm believes is necessary to tackle security issues it assesses in the region will be put in the contract and will be financed in the contract. Security remains the responsibility of the firm. In some cases where, for instance, the military of the country would be needed to actually be able to go to a zone, this is also these measures also allow making sure that the contracting authority has taken the measures that are needed if the case may be. And last but not least, the last bullet point is also mentioning that in case of imminent danger, we included in the contracts that are going to be implemented in these orange and red zones, that the firm has the right to leave the site immediately. It's quite an important feature that we added, and of course then there is some kind of responsibility to that afterwards, but at least the firm is allowed to just go if it believes that there is something that would put its workers or its consultants at risk. AFD has also been quite pioneering on this subject. We know that other donors have some degree of similar measures, but having this mandatory requirement that in orange and red zones, security requirements must be included in the bidding documents is quite new. So this was the second topic, and last topic to finish this presentation is the one of taxes, which was also briefly mentioned by the colleagues at VBI. We know, painfully as well, that this can be a very difficult topic in the preparation and implementation of especially consulting services contracts. In this case, for works and goods, it's a bit less of an issue maybe. But for consulting services, we know that consulting firms, and especially European ones, meaning the ones that may not have always a branch in the country of implementation, may face a number of unknowns when you prepare a proposal for a given country. And the issue for us as donor is to make sure that the RFP is as clear as possible. The request for proposal is as clear as possible as regards taxes, to ensure that we limit any risks of delays, because we know that if things are not clear, then during negotiation between contract signature, it could take a long time to get to a common understanding of taxes. And then, of course, delays also during implementation, where problems could happen only when an invoice is coming and has to be treated, even if things have not been already identified during at contract signature. So what we did is that we discussed with a number of engineering firms to better understand the situation, and we came up with a number of changes to our standard request for proposals to make it basically to make it mandatory for the contracting authority to consider these issues when preparing the RFP, to include the taxes which do apply to the contract, to include the rates, and to be very clear as to what is going to be part of the evaluation or not, and very clear as to who is going to pay which taxes to whom, basically, which can be a nightmare, as I'm sure many of you have experienced. So basically, you'll see in our standard request for proposal that we have identified that basically value-added tax, withholding tax, contract registration fees, and in some cases, custom duties are the main taxes applicable to, I'm talking local taxes, by the way, applicable to the contracts. And these are the ones that should be separated from the financial proposal, that are not going to be evaluated, but which will be part of the contract. And then the question is, who is paying VAT, who is paying withholding tax, etc., etc. So this, of course, we as AFD cannot have the answer for all the countries. When not fiscal specialists for all of these countries. So the contracting authority should know. It's also part of the preparation of proposals for the consulting firm to get some degree of understanding of the fiscal context, to be sure that it will prepare a proposal that abides by local regulations. But at least we try to highlight this issue in the RFP to make sure that there is a discussion. If it's not clear, there should be requests for clarifications during the proposal preparation period to make sure that this issue is as clear as possible. We believe that we came to some degree of success, because we noticed that the RFPs are at least now address the issue of taxes, and they are at least partially filled as to this issue. I cannot assure you of 100% success on this aspect, and it's a very specific and very complex one, but at least we believe that we help addressing the issue, and this is what we feel we can do at the procurement level, at least. So this is what we wanted to present to you, these three main topics where we've been discussing with engineering firms extensively to try to improve and develop new aspects of our standard procurement documents. Of course, there's always more room for improvement, and there are a number of issues which are still being discussed, and which hopefully will come to further improvements on the standard bidding documents in the near future. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Xavier. We can see that the close relationship with Syntec Ingénierie is really giving you an insight of what the firms need when it comes to procurement, and that you're able to pioneer important topics such as the ones you've mentioned in the last part of your presentation. So I think this is very useful for the industry, that you hear, and you have a very you're attentive to the needs of the firms that are working with you. So this is very good to know. I would like to, before attending and looking at the questions, to give the floor to Éloi Gramboulin for more insights on Syntec's experience on AFD procurements. Éloi, when you want.
Good afternoon, everybody. I will be very brief since I think AFD was extensive in the presentation of the work that have been done together. So I have the pleasure to represent the French engineering companies, Syntec, so the correspondent of VBI in France, so to say. So just for you to know, it's roughly 400 French companies and 300,000 jobs in France. So just a few words to explain you what was the approach that was taken with AFD to increase the quality of our collaboration. There was a kind of selection of topics which were raised rather by AFD or by Syntec, by our members. And then we have built up dedicated working groups with adequate people from AFD, from the technical team, procurement team, securities, and from our people within membership of the companies of Syntec that were relevant on the topic. So I think Xavier explained pretty well what our work has led to with regard to environmental and social clauses, tax and securities. And I'm sure everybody around the table is extremely sensitive to the fact that, for example, tax issues are extremely clear at tender stage, and same issue for securities, so that we can for securities, one of the idea behind was, one of the target was clearly not to go to the lowest bid in terms of security. Maybe just two more words. This great collaboration is being carried on today, and we are currently working on two additional working groups. One which is related to transparency and increase the level of transparencies, and the other one is related to quality of services, which comes from either AFD team, where comments are coming from the team of AFD with regard to quality of services on some topics such as innovation or social aspect of what is the job that is being performed, or coming from Syntec. So in order to let time for the question, I leave the floor.
Okay, thank you so much, Eloi. I think those two topics are also very interesting, and we also hope that EFCA can showcase this good practice in international forums. We also participate in international procurement forums through FIDIC, and we hope that the European good practice in procurement for developing countries can also be highlighted and better known. So this is something that we have taken on within EFCA. We would have liked to have the presentation by KfW directly by Ms. Prasse. There seemed to be a technical problem. She wasn't able to join. What we can do is we can forward her presentation and probably yours, Emeline and Xavier, if you don't mind. We can share. Yeah.
My name is Cenk Tanrıverdi. I'm from Turkey. I'm attending this meeting not on behalf of, but I'm from the Association of Consulting Engineers and Architects of Turkey. I have a few questions that are addressed to AFD for Emeline or Javier. My first question is regarding the involvement of consulting companies or consulting services during procurement preparations, like preparations of technical and tendering bidding documents. Could you briefly explain how interested companies can get involved at this early stage, probably with the contracting authorities? The other one is regarding the direct shortlisting. In your slide, you mentioned a threshold of 200,000 euros. Below that, as far as, if I'm right, you can apply a direct shortlisting. I would be glad if you also could share some details about that, how to get considered for such shortlists. Another one is the option given to the contractors to suspend works or services in case of imminent danger. This is actually, I find it very useful, but I'm really curious how this is contractually considered, how this is actually integrated into contract as a force majeure, or I don't know how it's treated. And I would be really happy to hear your previous experiences.
Thank you.
And one last thing, sorry, it might be a bit, but I'm done. I'm also wondering how AFD conducts monitoring activities during the implementation or execution of the contracts with the contracting authorities. I mean, I'm asking those questions because, you know, actually with an intention of exploring possible various stages of implementation and procurement, various companies, consultants, or engineering companies can get on board. Thank you very much.
Okay, who's going to take the question, Xavier?
Sure. Thank you for this question. So I'm going to try and answer each of them. So the first one, I'm not sure I fully understood the scope, but I understand that the question was regarding the preparation stage. I'm not sure if the question was regarding how to prepare who is preparing the bidding documents, or how to know that a project is being prepared.
Actually, I was asking because I was wondering ways of getting involved with the contracting authorities, you know, starting to assisting them even with the initiation phase.
Okay, so, well, basically when contracting authority is receiving financing from AFD, we have an overall financing agreement which includes a number of contracts and tasks, and from there on the contracting authority is going to start preparing the bidding documents for the different contracts to be awarded. So the firms are all informed at the same time when the tender is being published, basically on our AFD DG Market website for international consulting, international procurement competition, sorry. It could be just advertised in local newspapers or local portals if it's going to be a national procurement competition. So the information is made public per our guidelines, and all the firms are informed of the bidding processes at the same time. In some cases, in some countries, basically, the contracting authority is required by law to publish some kind of procurement plan or advance procurement notice, these kind of things. This is not something that AFD requires. So there is, in some cases, they do it like a general procurement notice, but it's not something that we specifically require. The second question was regarding direct shortlisting, if I'm not mistaken. So this is, yes, an opportunity that is given to contracting authorities in the procurement guidelines of AFD under 200,000 euros, and provided AFD accepts it, meaning provided we consider it applicable, for the contracting authority to directly prepare a shortlist. In general, this is for national competitions, so it's going to be rather for national firms. The contracting authority generally has an idea of the market, the firms that are already active or have some experience, etc. And we will give a no objection on this. So it has to go through us at this stage as well. Regarding the question of suspending the contract, you can find the different, the specifics of this in our standard request for proposal. I'm not going to go into the details, but I can tell you it's Article 18.2 of the contract in this particular conditions of contract. It's an article we added 18.2, and it explains how the consulting firm can suspend the services if it considers that the security risk is too high. Of course, there is a possibility for the contracting authority to dispute this if it considers that there was no such risk, and then the dispute, if any, goes along the usual ways of dispute resolution for consulting services. The last question was regarding the monitoring by AFD on the execution of the contract. What I can tell you is that we are mobilized at the different payment stages, for one thing, because we very often make direct payments. So in which case we ensure that the deliverables, for instance, have been rightly validated. We also ensure monitoring of any amendments of the to the contract or termination, for instance. These are places where we come in place. I'm talking really from a procurement perspective. I don't know, Emmeline, if you want to add something on the more operational monitoring, which is not really our task, but maybe you have a word about it.
Yes, I can. In addition to what Xavier said, we also have monitoring missions from time to time on field, also with the contracting authority to supervise the overall implementation or execution of the project and the different contracts, consulting services contracts, as well as works or goods contracts. So it depends on the need on the project. It can be done from our the staff based in headquarters in Paris, as well as from our local agencies based on the countries. So we have this monitoring closer from the local staff in the countries, and regular supervision missions from the headquarters.
Thank you very much for the answers.
Okay, so there's somebody that's raised their hand, but I want to pick up on one of the questions that you haven't answered, because if you see in the chat, Emmeline has been answering some of the questions, so you will find her answers directly posted. There was a question regarding the indication of the nationalities in that 83% of amount of consulting service contracts going to EU firms. So how much of that is spread around across Europe, or is it mostly French? Or if you could give some idea of what the distribution is. Is it very spread or a bit centralized for now?
Well, we don't have the exact figures and the breakdown of the 83%. But we can say that there are many French firms that are awarded contracts, consulting firms contracts, out of the 83%. Okay, and is it aligned with the EU Procurement Directive? Is it a French? There's also a question regarding your alignment in your procurement procedures. What would you say it is aligned to? It's aligned to the best international practices, and it's mostly aligned with the World Bank and multilateral development banks. Okay. And we are very aligned with KfW, for instance, as well. Okay, great. So there's a question from Alexander von Gertz.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Alexander von Gertz from Sweco, Germany. I would have another question for the colleagues from ADF. You mentioned the increased ESHS requirements, which you introduced already years ago. And I was wondering, how did the costs for consulting services and works develop in consequence of the increased ESHS requirements? I assume that since there was more work for the consultants and higher requirements for the works contractors, that the prices and therefore the average cost for your investment projects would have increased.
We did some studies regarding the works contract, and what we found is that the total cost of the contract were not really higher with the inclusion of the ESHS requirements in comparison with works without these requirements. And to have a figure, it's around, I'm not sure of the figure, but it's around 5% of the total cost of the works contract, which is not very big. For consultants, we don't have the figures to know the comparison with the inclusion of new tasks regarding the ESHS requirements and supervision around that. I'm not sure that it will increase the prices a lot, because it should already been taken into account in supervision. So maybe we'll need a specific experts, or maybe one or two specific experts on ESHS topics, but it has already had to be implemented.
Okay. There was another question from Christoph Schaefer-Kennert.
Ines, I raised my hand because of the question on nationality of contracts, and I already heard the answer because I can't see the chat, so I have the same question as in the chat. But as I'm already talking, thank you very much to the AFD colleagues for the very good presentation. I think that's sounds like state of the art, and I know the exchange between KfW and AFD has been ongoing, so I assume it's very similar, the procurement services between KfW and AFD. Or perhaps the question would be, are there big differences to the colleagues of AFD?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I don't know. I'd say that basically there's no big difference. We have a few very small different approaches, but not very significant to my knowledge. I don't know, Emeline, if you have another opinion. But
no, we are very aligned with the KfW regarding consulting firms. The process is the same. I think they have the same way of issuing no objection letters at each stage of the procurement process. The standard bidding documents are also very closed. Of course, we have some specific eligibility criteria and so on, because we don't have the same exact regulations, but I guess that we are very close.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm picking up a question from Gianluca. It says, dear AFD, how do you make sure that the required security plans are properly and uniformly taken into consideration and budgeted by shortlisted consulting firms in their proposals? Does AFD finance the required security issues? How are the security issues evaluated? Some of our firms are worried that this could be a competition factor. So if you could elaborate a bit on that.
okay, Emeline, do you want me to take this?
Yes.
Okay. No, it's a very interesting question. Of course, the issue of security is well, very touchy and has a lot of very serious consequences. The solution we found is that in the RFP, what is outlined is mandatory minimum requirements that we put, and we as AFD, of course, but even the contracting authority is not asked to analyze the quality of the security plans, meaning that the contracting authority is not going to, in a way, take responsibility for the security plans. It remains the security plan of the firm, but the idea is that the contracting authority wants, and we want the contracting authority to make sure that there is a security plan in place. So the kind of criteria we put, for instance, is the consulting firm should have what could I take as an example? Should have looked at the different hotels there are in the area and made sure that they have one which is which has a good security features. For instance, they should have the consulting firm should have thought of taking security measures in terms of I don't know, armored vehicles or these kind of things to go to a given area. We're not saying that. Well, or the contracting authority is not saying you should take two armored vehicles to go to this area. This is the firm's responsibility. But the firm should take these measures in place. Yes, these security issues are financed. They are part of the contract and they are evaluated as well. Because, again, this remains part of the proposal of the firm. Of course, we don't want to race to the bottom on security, so this is why we have these minimum requirements, and there must be a security plan. But starting from this, it's up to the firm to be responsible for it. And of course, neither the contracting authority nor AFD can take any responsibility on the security plan and how the firm intends to take its security into account.
Okay. Thank you so much for that detailed explanation. It's a privilege for us to hear you say that live, because it's something we wonder every time we have to prepare a proposal. So that's much appreciated. Dr. Meyerhoff, you want to take the floor, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to come back a bit to the topic discussed before. I also believe that the procurement procedures are quite similar between AFD and KfW. So, but I have two questions where I think there were still differences, and it's especially the topics we are discussing also with KfW. So one is the role of the tender agents, and the other one is the question of local taxes again. And I really appreciate that you also had in your presentation a slide referring to that issue, showing that AFD is very aware of the importance of this issue. So two questions. The role of the tender agent is very clear. So we have an independent person involved also in the evaluation process. So assisting the local evaluation committees with his experience. Is there anything of that kind also in case of AFD, or are you in AFD also evaluating the proposals, or is it exclusively the responsibility of the beneficiary? This is one question. The other one with local taxes, I'm not quite sure if I really understood what you said. Are you always requesting that the consultants exclude local taxes from their financial offer and they show it separately? Or could you please very briefly explain again what is the normal procedure regarding local taxes in the financial offer?
Sure, maybe I can start with taxes. I don't know, Emeline, if you want to discuss the tender agent yes, matter in a second answer. So regarding taxes, the standard rule is that local taxes should be excluded from evaluation. Mm-hmm. This is what is planned for in the RFP as a basis. So this means that yes, of course, the financial proposal must put a figure which is the cost that is actually going to go to the consulting firm, and then separately all the local taxes. And normally in most of the donors RFPs, standard RFPs, you will find the word local indirect taxes. We stopped using this vocabulary because I'm not sure everyone has the same understanding of what is a local indirect tax. We've seen many different understandings anyway. Yeah. So we switched to a new way of showing things where we actually specify the taxes that are applicable, and meaning that they have to be specified separately from the financial proposal and not evaluated. And these are the ones I showed in the slide: VAT, withholding tax, and contract registration in general. It could be different from country to country, but this is the way it works, is that these taxes are going to be out of the evaluation, but still shall be taken into the final contract.
Thank you. Yeah, very good.
Okay, there's a comment praising one aspect from the KfW procedures that we would have liked to hear directly from KfW, which is the direct payment to consultants, which is something they're very keen on keeping. And the question is asking where AFD would consider adopting such a measure specifically for consulting services.
I can answer to that
yes,
question.
Emmeline?
Yes. Well, we also have the possibility to make direct payments. It's always on behalf of the contracting authority because we sign the financing agreement with the contracting authority, and as we say, it is responsible for the procurement process, but it will sign the contracts with the consulting firms. So if they can request us to make direct payments, and it's usually stipulation and the possibility of our financing agreements. It really depends on the projects, how it has been prepared and built, if it's a grant or a loan. And in some situation we make direct payments, so it's still a possibility. But in some cases, and especially for loans, we do provide funds to the contracting authority, the beneficiary, and it will make the payments directly from this money that has already been disbursed by AFD. So there are two types of way of making the payments on the contracts. I don't know if it answers your question, but to summarize, we have the possibility to make direct payments as well.
Okay, very good. I think we're reaching a close. Even if we couldn't have KfW's presentation directly, we will make sure that it gets to you. We did have the pleasure of counting with Dr. Ralph Meyerhoff, who was able to make a good summary of the procedure. So we appreciate very much your input to this webinar. We've actually used up all the time. I think it has been extremely valuable, very practical, very business oriented. So we really appreciate your time, Emmeline and Xavier, and also VBI and Santec Ingénieries representatives. Thank you so much for your support. I leave Jan, you want to do a closing note on the webinar before we cut off?
Well, once again, I think this is a very good step in the right direction for starting a more close collaboration between, especially in this case, AFD and the engineering consultancy industry. So once again, I would like to reiterate the fact that you can call on us, on our federation, as a sounding board. So whenever you would like to initiate new procedures, whatever, that you know, you could always knock at our door to find out what the ideas would be from our industry in that respect. So I very much appreciate your openness and your availability to participate in this webinar. And I hope that we can fruitfully and constructively continue our dialogue in the future with AFD and eventually also with KfW, which for some or another obscure reason couldn't connect with us today. So, but that would be my closing remark, Ines.
Okay, thank you very much to all. Enjoy your afternoon and see you soon.
Okay, thank you so much. And bye-bye for now.
Bye.